On this episode, we talk all about sleep. Sleep is the foundation of your health and of your anti-aging. We talk about the different stages of sleep, and we talk about how to optimize your sleep using the best lifestyle techniques as well as supplements. If you're enjoying these videos and the anti-aging tips that we provide, please make sure to click down below to subscribe to this channel so you can get notified of new videos and new tips and tricks in your anti-aging arsenal. Stay tuned for an amazing episode. To my heart and certainly his heart, we're going to talk about sleep. We're going to go into a lot of detail, a lot of the brass tacks that you can apply to improve your sleep immediately. In terms of an introduction, Dr. Kirk Parsley has been lecturing on the health, wellness, and longevity benefits of quality and sufficient sleep since 2009. In the 12 years he's been studying the deleterious effects of inadequate or poor quality sleep, he has come to realize that sleep impacts one's overall health, disease, and mortality risk. Dr. Parsley is a former SEAL, so he's a badass, and he works with some high achievers and constantly stressed out people. So with that said, the show notes for this episode are going to be at antiaginghacks.net/good sleep. Dr. Parsley, welcome to the Anti-Aging Hacks show.
Thank you very much. I feel welcome.
Great. So in terms of a background, please tell the audience who you are and how you got into sleep in the first place.
Well, that's a long story, man. You want me to go back to when I was born? Or
No,
well, not that far. So as you alluded to, I was a SEAL right out of high school, actually. I did that until my mid-20s. Got out, went to college. And while I was in college, I thought I was going to be a physical therapist. So I started volunteering at San Diego Sports Medicine Center. It's a rehabilitation facility, and I got hired on his job there. Decided I didn't want to be a physical therapist. Got kind of talked into being a doctor by the doctors there. Went into the military's medical school. I had no real burning desire to go back in the military, to be honest. But I had. I had military service, which was going to increase the amount of money I would make while a medical student. And then that's the bigger part. They were going to pay me to go to medical school instead of the other way around.
Awesome.
And I was already married, I already had a kid, had another kid on the way. So it just made sense. And I figured I would get back to the SEAL teams as their doctor, kind of get back to the community, then, get out and move about my life. Always interested in sports medicine, orthopedic surgery and sports medicine is the only things I really cared about in medical school and internship and residency. That's all I was doing. And then I got back to the SEAL teams, got put in charge of building a rehab facility for them, ironically, which was right up my alley. Perfect. Did all that. And then, we hired all these experts in sports medicine that were more expert than I was. And so then they just put me in charge of it and said, well, you can be the leader of all these people who know more than you. And I'm like, okay, that's the military way. And so, I had an office there, but all the SEALs, SEALs are a lot like professional athletes in that the worst thing you can do for them is to put them on the bench, right? That's the absolute worst thing that can ever happen to them is not be able to do their job. It's their identity. It's, their community. It's their family. It's who they are. And so if you're somebody who can put them on the bench, i.e. a doctor, then they usually don't tell you the truth because you might put them on the bench. So they're not going to come and, pour their heart out to you and tell you what's going on. But because I was a SEAL and because I had been a SEAL recently enough to where a lot of SEALs there knew me and obviously respected me enough to come in and tell me their story. And then, they would come in and shut the door and say, hey, man, let me tell you what's really going on. And, they had a lot of complaints. Their cognition wasn't what it should be. They felt like their memory was bad. Their episodic memory, their short-term memory, their long-term memory all seemed to be suffering. They couldn't concentrate. They couldn't really focus. Their emotions were all over the place. Working out really smart, eating really well. taking care of themselves in every way that they knew how, and, felt like they were getting fatter and slower and weaker and losing muscle. And I didn't have the slightest idea of what was wrong with them, so I basically just did a bunch of blood work on them, did a bunch of labs, did every kind of study I could think of. I was pulling like 100 different lab values to just see if I could find a pattern. Mm-hmm. But honestly, I didn't know. I didn't have a clue what was going on with them. And somewhere along the way, the way the community works is very word of mouth. So one guy comes in and tells their story and feels like I was helpful, or at least attentive, and was trying to be helpful. And then he tells his buddy, and he tells his buddy. And the next thing you know, I have 100 guys coming in my office telling me the same story. And, along that path, it kind of stood out to me. This one guy said something about using Ambien every night. And I'd made a note in the margin, like, seems like that's kind of common amongst the guys who've come in and talked to me. I wonder if that's related. And then when he left, I went back through all my patient records, and every single person who had come to complain to me was using Ambien. And they had probably mentioned something about their sleep, but they wouldn't have complained about it, just because it's not a community that values sleep. And then, this is back 2009. It was worse. I mean, I think a lot of people don't appreciate how completely non-talked about and unaddressed sleep was, 11 years ago, 12 years ago. Sure. Nobody was talking about it to any extent whatsoever. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't know anything about sleep. I didn't have a single class in medical school on sleep. I didn't know the first thing about sleep. I knew what the drugs did. Like, I knew how they worked, but I didn't know their side effects. And so I just had to learn a lot about it. But I just thought, well, maybe this could be a factor. And so I started learning about the drugs and how they interfered, how they impact sleep. But then I had to learn a lot about sleep to understand what they were like, what the drugs were doing to sleep. And then I started telling these guys, well, hey, I think if I get you off these sleep drugs, you might turn around a lot of this stuff. And that was such a novel concept. I got laughed out of the offices of the leadership of the teams when I was trying to tell them that I thought their health problem was actually a sleep problem. Wow. They just, it was the dumbest thing they'd ever heard in their lives. And I was telling them, that sleep was impacting their hormones, because all these guys had hormone dysregulation. These 30-year-old men had the hormones of 65-year-old obese pre-diabetic men. Wow. And everybody, had their theory about why that was. I'm like, I think sleep's a big player in this. And they're like, oh, their hormones are being impacted by sleep, huh? And I'm like, yeah. And they literally laughed at me. And I thought it was the dumbest thing. And now I think most Americans probably know that. Like most people are like, yeah, that's obvious. But that just shows how new this was, And then, eventually I got buy-in just because I had a lot of good results with guys. I got them off their sleep drugs, and I got, I made huge improvements in a lot of guys' lives. And that led to me sort of lecturing to really big groups within the community. And, we would have these sort of health and wellness symposiums, and we'd bring in all these speakers, and it's, the people that you know of and think of as sort of the health leaders, the health and wellness gurus online that frequently lecture. And so I was sharing the stage with these guys, and, a lot of them were really kind of wowed by what I was saying, and they were pulling me into other conferences, and I was taking leave from the military and going to lecture on sleep to all sorts of audiences. And then when I got out of the SEAL teams and started private practice again, that just, the sleep component's just always been there. And that's how I unwittingly became, this sleep enthusiast that I am now. Yeah.
It helps to be the first person on the scene talking about sleep. I'm sure that got you a lot of attention early on. Before we move on, I wanted to ask you one question on the SEAL team. When I think of SEAL teams, I think of SEAL Team 6. I think of guys just getting on a plane to do a mission in some foreign country overnight. jumping out of the airplane with night vision goggles and doing all that kind of stuff. Is that pretty normal in the SEAL team?
It's normal when you're making a movie about the SEAL teams. You know, that the SEAL teams are, you know, there are very scary, action-packed moments in it, but it's like anything else. You know, most of your time is pretty low speed. You know, most of your time is training and sitting around and waiting for planes and, you know, packing up equipment and moving stuff around. And, you know, like anything else, you know, probably 20% of it's like super exciting and scary and risky. And the rest of it's just kind of work, like regular work.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Let's move on. I want to talk, I have a lot of questions for you, Dr. Parsley, about sleep. I don't know if we'll get to all of them, but let's try as much as we can. So first of all, if you would just a little preview for folks that don't know, why is sleep so important for us as humans?
Well, I mean, there's so many ways to approach that, but I think the most compelling way to think about it is that it's literally a contract that you're born into, and every other form of life on this planet has some form of sleep. Every mammal sleeps pretty much like we do. Every mammal on this planet uses the sun as its cue as to when to be asleep. And basically this contract you're born into is that your brain and body are good for about 16 hours. And after about 16 hours, they need about 8 hours to repair. And when I say repair, I mean that literally, and that, you know, when you go about your day doing things, you're actually wearing down tissue. You're damaging some stuff. Like if, you know, obviously if you trip and fall and you bang yourself up a little, you've damaged some tissues. So when does that repair? It really doesn't repair during the day. It repairs at night. You know, when you exercise, you don't get stronger, you get weaker. You damage your tissues, you damage your connective tissue, you damage your muscles, and then they grow back stronger. You know, when you cram a bunch of new information in your head and you learn, you actually make a mess. You know, it ends up, you know, looking like one of the old operators consoles. You have all sorts of useless connections all over the place. You build up a lot of waste products. You deplete the energy stores of the brain, and your brain's actually worse. It's functioning worse at the end of the day than it is at the beginning of the day. And everything that you're trying to get better at, everything you're trying to learn, everything you're trying to improve upon, all of that improvement's happening at night while you're sleeping. But all of the repair is happening just to get you ready for tomorrow. So if you think about the concept of that 8 hours, so if you're alert and active and doing things awake for 16 hours, you need 8 hours to repair. That 8 hours to repair is just getting you ready for tomorrow. Like that's all, like it's a negative sum game at best. Like once you hit mid-adulthood, right? When you're a child, we see children grow, and children sleep more too. But you know, you see a child go to sleep, and then they wake up the next day not only recovered, they wake up better, right? And they're taller, they're faster, they're stronger, they're smarter. Like they're growing every night. And then at some point, it kind of plateaus, and we're basically trying to get 8 hours of sleep to recover from the 16 hours we are at work, so that tomorrow we can be as good as we were today. At least maybe a little bit better, but at least as good as we were this morning when we woke up. Yeah. And then at some point, we don't sleep well enough and we can't repair fast enough. And we don't wake up at 100% the next day. Even if we get a great night's sleep, we wake up at 99%, right? And then the next day we're waking up at 99% of that. And that's what we call aging. And so if you enjoy your waking hours, if you have a vision of a future that you're trying to direct yourself towards, all of that is reliant upon you moving towards what you want in a healthful way, you know, where you're learning new information, making accomplishments, you know, growing, maybe if it's fitness goals, whatever it is, whatever your goals are, your ability to move towards that is 100% linked to your ability and, you know, the importance you place on getting good sleep.
Mhm.
I used to teach when I first started all this. I taught there were 4 pillars of health, right? So there was sleep, nutrition, exercise, and stress mitigation, mindfulness, mindset, whatever you want to call that final pillar. And in the last few years, I've amended that, and it's like there's 3 pillars of health. There's nutrition, there's exercise, and there's stress mitigation. But all of that sits on a foundation. That foundation that it sits on is sleep. And the reason for making that distinction is because it really doesn't matter if you do the other ones well. If you don't sleep well, you can't be anywhere close to your optimal self. It's not possible. You can do everything well and not eat a great diet and still be pretty damn good, right? But or not exercise smartly, you still be pretty damn good. But if you don't sleep well, nope.
Yeah.
Can't be good.
100%. Yeah, it's so important for anti-aging, for longevity, for looking good for longer, keeping your skin quality good, keeping your cortisol low, keeping your weight low in balance. It's so important. Like we could talk about this for hours, I guess. But yeah, thank you for covering that.
I can summarize that even better. Like it's a really simplistic way of thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
So most people know anabolic, right? People think of anabolic steroids, guys with huge muscles. But anabolic means you're taking small particles and you're building more complex things. So taking amino acids and building them into muscle. That's an anabolic activity. You have hormones that drive your body towards anabolic behavior, where you're growing and getting better and repairing. The opposite of anabolic is you're starving and your muscles are actually being consumed by your body as an amino acid source. So we're taking complex things and we're breaking them down into amino acids, and that's catabolic. Stress hormones are catabolic. Sex hormones, well, there's a lot of anabolic hormones, right? So sleep is anabolic. Sleep is the most anabolic time of your life. Mm-hmm. Being awake is catabolic. So you're breaking yourself down the whole time you're awake, and you're building yourself up and repairing when you're asleep. Aging is simply a mismatch of those things. You're breaking down faster than you can repair. That's aging. The medical definition of aging is that you're more likely to have a disease and die. That's really what it means. You're becoming less resilient. You're becoming more catabolic. The reason old people shrink is catabolic hormones, which are by and large stress hormones.
Mm-hmm. That's a fantastic analogy and way to put it. And I love that you've put sleep as the base, the foundation that the other 3 pillars that you talked about sit on top of, instead of having 4 pillars that everything else is on top of. So I appreciate that. Okay, so let's talk about when people talk about sleep, there's different things that get thrown around. There's the light sleep, there's REM sleep, there's deep sleep. And obviously now a lot of people are wearing these sleep trackers, which lets them track what's going on. In your opinion, Dr. Parsley, how many hours of sleep do we need per night to get sufficient quantities of at least REM and deep?
So that number is right around 8 hours. It depends on whose research you read. It's somewhere between 7.5 hours and 8 hours and 12 minutes. And it's not important whether it's 7.5 hours or 8.5 hours. It's about 8 hours. And it's not the same every day, right? How much food do you need to eat every day? Depends on the day, right? Like you can do things where you need more food, that you can do things where you need less food. How much sleep do you need? Well, it depends on what you did during the 16 hours. If you ran an ultra marathon, and when you go to sleep tonight, how many hours of sleep do you need? All of them. You need all the sleep. As much as you can sleep. But the 8 hour number is super resilient, right? It has existed across all the research for as long as we've been doing research. Mm-hmm. And the way that you know that number exists is you completely sleep adapt people, which means, the first time they did this, they did it in World War II pill bunkers, and they put these college students in there for 14 hours a day, I think. Mm-hmm. They went in just a room with a bed and a toilet and a sink and nothing else. So, and this is a long time ago, well before cell phones or anything. And it was a dark room. They didn't even have a light. And the average college student slept for about 12 hours. Wow. And then over the course letting them sleep as much as they want every night, about 6 weeks later, everybody's sleeping 8 hours, and they're sleeping 8 hours no matter who they are, no matter how much they started sleeping with. Everybody averages out around 8 hours, which means that they're laying in a cold, dark room with nothing to do for 6 hours a day and not sleeping. So you can say those people obviously are sleep adapted. They don't need any more sleep, or they would have slept more. When we study hunter-gathering tribes today that have never experienced electricity, they still live like our ancestors did thousands of years ago. They go to sleep about 3 hours after the sun goes down, and then they wake up right around the time the sun's coming up. And that turns out to be about 7.5 to 8 hours every night. So it's a very resilient number. But if you are, and that's a normal life, right? That's saying that you're just doing kind of average amounts of things that people do. If you are, if you're an athlete and you're super focused on your training, you might need more. If you really burn your brain out, like in medical school, you're just constantly cramming in new information and using a ton of mental energy, you need more sleep. So, but eight hours is a safe number. And the way if you're at that, the way if you're getting enough sleep, and some people need 9 hours, some people are closer to 7, but it's somewhere around 8. The way is if you go to sleep at roughly the same time every day, and you wake up roughly the same time every day before your alarm clock goes off, or without an alarm clock at all, if that's the case. And if you do that every day and you feel good and you're performing good, then you're getting enough sleep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fantastic. I think there's one distinction that I've learned, at least from myself, is that time in bed for me does not equal sleeping time, because I'm tossing, turning, I'm awake for parts of the night. And I learned a couple of years ago that I was waking up more than I should, and I've been working on fixing that. But do you see that with clients or people you work with too, that they're waking up a lot in the middle of the night?
Yeah. So what I find with my clients, so when I work with first responders, military, law enforcement, things like that, they're usually driven by their shift, and it's the demands of their job usually that's interfering with their sleep. When I'm dealing with athletes, it's usually, their travel, like which baseball have like 165 games or something in a year, and they're flying coast to coast. And for them, it's that. But when I'm working with private clients who are just it's not their job causing it per se. It's how they're living their life. Almost everybody has a huge stress component, and it's high stress hormones. So that I don't want to get too off on too much of a tangent, but there's a few different things that are causing you to sleep, and one thing is called sleep pressure, and sleep pressure builds up throughout the day. Regardless if you're stressed or not, the sleep pressure is building up, and the molecule is adenosine, and that's what caffeine blocks, is the adenosine receptors. So that's how caffeine works. But if you build up enough adenosine, you'll be able to fall asleep. But if your stress hormones are high, you wake up a little bit later, right? Once you get through your first kind of sleep cycle and you flush out all your adenosine, you're just going to wake up and have a hard time going back to sleep. That's really common in men. And that's because men have, by and large, more muscle mass than women, so they produce more adenosine. Women tend to have a hard time falling asleep. But again, it's also stress. And I actually have a PDF on it's a free PDF on my website that I forget what it's called. It's terrible, but I think it's just called the Stress PDF or Stress and Sleep or something like that. And I have this whole program for like teaching people how to minimize stress when they're sleeping. But that's the most common form of insomnia, is just having too high of stress hormones, because stress hormones are wake promoting. And then once you start feeling like you're failing in your attempts to sleep a lot, then the next thing that happens is what we call psychophysiologic insomnia, which basically means that you can't sleep because you're worried that you won't be able to sleep.
That's true.
And that's those two are kind of tied together, but that's usually what happens with, I'd say 90% of my clients.
Wow. So let me dig a little bit deeper. You said something really fascinating right now, which is men have more adenosine, which builds the sleep pressure. So men have an easier time falling asleep, but they might wake up 3 to 4 hours into their sleep cycle. And because of that stress hormone, now they're awake, tossing and turning. But for women, it's the other way. They have less adenosine, therefore they have trouble falling asleep in the first place because of stress.
Yeah, because if you think about, all of this regulation is being done in your brain, and it's the adenosine built up in your brain that's causing the sleep pressure. And if you think about it, I'm 240 pounds, but if I'm sitting next to a 120-pound woman, I have obviously way more muscle mass than she does, but our brains are pretty close to the same size, right? There's not a huge difference in brain size between small people and big people. So maybe my brain's 10% larger but I'm over twice her, probably 3 times her muscle mass, honestly, right? So I'm going to build up way more adenosine. It says I'm going to have way more sleep pressure and I'm going to fall asleep. But one of the things that happens in your first, in your deep sleep cycles, one of the first things that happens is you flush out, like the astrocytes in your brain that hold the structure of your brain. They shrink about 30%. They increase the flow of the cerebral spinal fluid, and it flushes out all the adenosine. Now, once all the adenosine's gone, you don't have any more sleep pressure. And the sleep cycle lasts, 90 to 120 minutes. So if you have high stress hormones, and you start coming back through, because you go from being awake, you go down into deep sleep. And then when you go back to REM's actually a higher brain state than being awake. So you actually go through being awake to get to REM. And if you have a lot of stress hormones, you just wake up on your way to REM. And, if you need 2 sleep cycles to flush it out, maybe you wake up 3 hours or 4 hours into it. But if you have a lot of stress hormones, you might wake up after the first cycle. And then they just can't fall back asleep. And then, women by and large, and I don't mean to sound sexist or I'm not judging or diminishing anyone, but women tend to focus a lot on on their environment and how other people are feeling and thinking and what they're saying and all that. And their brains are just really preoccupied during the day. And kind of the first time that they're alone with their own thoughts and thinking about themselves is usually when they get into bed. And that's just really stimulating and weight promoting, because you're essentially almost like goal setting and, thinking about your future and so forth. And so, or, just worried about any of the mistakes you made, all that kind of stuff. But, most of my female clients, that's their complaint. They get in bed and their mind's just racing.
Okay. So
they just have to exhaust themselves before they fall asleep,
Yeah. Let me double click on that, because this is, I think, the fascinating little piece we were talking about. Maybe not for you, because you talk about this all the time, but at least for me, because I've been stuck in this loop, or I have been in the past, where I would wake up at 2, 3, 4 a.m. and then just kind of lay awake for an hour or two because the pressure's gone. I didn't realize this was what's going on. What would you say to a client, male or female, that has stress as a cause for bad sleep? How can they fix that? Day to day.
I think you really have to do that PDF, and that's something that took me years to come up with, and it would take me a couple hours to describe. But the highlights of it are that you need to make a list of all your stressors. You need to make a pact with yourself that the best you're ever going to be at handling your stress is after you've completely recovered after a good night's sleep. So that's when you want to handle all the stressors on your list. And then you need to set up a bedtime routine, and you need to have an alarm to wake you up. And in between the time that the alarm goes off to get ready for bed and the time you wake up in the morning, you don't ever look at the clock, because it doesn't matter what time it is. If you look at the clock, then you start waking yourself up. If you wake up in the middle of the night and you look and see and you go, oh, it's 2 o'clock in the morning. And then you start thinking about, well, what happens if I don't fall back asleep? And then, well, I could get up and I could do this, or, if I fall asleep in the next 13 minutes, then I can get, 4 hours and like you just start thinking, you start doing mental math, you start waking yourself up. And then you also can't not have an alarm, because if you don't set an alarm in the morning, whether you realize it or not, there's a little bit about you that's worried that you might oversleep. So you're more likely to wake up early. So you set an alarm when it's time to get ready for bed. And then there's kind of a whole spiel about how you get ready for bed. And then you get in bed, and then you don't get out of bed until your alarm clock goes off in the morning. If you wake up and you need to go to the bathroom, whatever, you get up, you go to the bathroom, you get back in bed, and then you just lay there and you meditate. You do breath work, you do progressive muscle relaxation, you do whatever it is that you learn to do to settle down your nervous system. And if your alarm clock is going to go off 15 minutes later, then great. You got 7 hours and 45 minutes of sleep and 15 minutes of meditation. If your alarm clock's not going to go off for 4 hours, you're going to fall back asleep. How long? I don't know. And you won't know either, because you never looked at the clock. And all that matters is that you're either meditating, relaxing, or sleeping. So you're still
fantastic.
Recovering.
Yeah, fantastic. I think I signed up for that PDF a couple of days ago. I believe it might be in my email, so I'll take a look. But this seems fascinating. And there's a lot of tips you just gave to the audience right there that they can start to do. Yes, looking at your phone at 4 a.m. is not going to help you at all, because now you're stressed about all kinds of things, just looking at the time.
Yep.
Okay, so in terms of setting a sleep architecture, so you touched on a few of these things. I know people talk about, blue blocking glasses and light in your room. How much of sleep preparation do you recommend to your clients, and what might be a few tips that you say, here's the 3 or 4 things you must do before you go to bed?
Yeah. So I find the easiest way to do this is just, educate people on what's going on. And then you can figure out all the nuances yourself based on your lifestyle and your whatever limitations there are around your sleeping. And really what the important thing to realize about sleep hygiene, it's just kind of fancy wording. It just means getting ready for sleep, right? So if you look at how we evolved, I alluded earlier to the fact that every animal on this planet, every mammal on this planet uses the sun as its cue as to when to be asleep and when to be awake. There's obviously animals that are awake at night, and there's animals that are awake during the day, and it doesn't matter. They're still using the sun as their cue as when they're supposed to be awake. And humans, we have some nerve cells in the back of our eyes that sense blue light. They actually don't have anything to do with vision. They just sense blue light. And when the blue light decreases, that causes those nerves to fire. They send some signals back to the back of the brain. There's this little gland in the back of your brain, pea-sized, maybe kidney bean kind of size, gland in the back of the brain. It secretes a hormone that most people have heard of, melatonin. Melatonin is like the starter pistol that initiates this whole cascade of completely changing your brain chemistry. And when it completely changes your brain chemistry, what it does is it stops your brain from perceiving and processing what your senses are bringing in. Right. So when you're asleep, your eyes still work, your ears still work, your nose still works. You can still tell, you can still taste, you can still feel soft touch, pain, sharp heat. You can still sense everything. Nothing's shut off. Just your processing of your brain has shut off. Right. You're not taking it in the way you ordinarily do. This is why you can turn on the lights and wake somebody up, because their eyes are still working. That's why you can, make a loud noise and wake people up. Their ears are still working. They're just not paying attention to it. So your brain turning off and not paying attention to your environment anymore. That's really all sleep is. Sleep means that you're alive, obviously, but you're not consciously aware of your environment anymore. That's the best definition of sleep, oddly enough. And then there are phases of sleep that we can subdivide down based on brain waves and respiratory and how fast you move and how much you move and all sorts of things like that. But the whole point of that is, from the time the sun goes down and the blue light goes out of your eyes until you're ready to go to bed, that whole process takes about 3 hours. When I was saying that we've looked at hunter-gatherers today who still live like our ancestors lived thousands of years ago. We've actually done sleep tracking on these guys, gone out there and studied them all over the world. There's way more of these tribes than you would think. And they fall asleep about 3 hours after the sun goes down, and then they wake up right around dawn. And humans don't modern humans don't spend 3 hours getting ready for bed. That would be the ideal, but we don't. So the best thing to do is approximate that the best we can. So if you think about what's happening, the sun goes down, their sensory starts diminishing. There's less stimulation because what sort of light did they have, right? Until 100 years ago, 150 years ago, what sort of light did you have? You didn't have any light. So there wasn't anything to see. There wasn't anything to pay attention to.
Right.
And then once the sun goes down, the other thing that happens is it gets colder. And as the environment gets colder, you get colder. And those are the three cues for your body to go to sleep. Decreased blue light, decreased mental cognitive activity, and decreased body temperature. Those are the three things that all sleep hygiene is built around. So the blue blocking glasses, just blocking blue light, because it doesn't matter how much light's going in your eyes. It matters how much blue light's going in your eyes. Right. So you can get rid of the blue light. It's the same as if you're not looking at light as far as getting your brain ready for sleep. And how much stimulation, how much visual stimulation there is to that, that can backfire as well. So, so all you have to do is block the light going in your eyes, decrease the stimulation around you, decrease your body temperature a little, and get in bed.
Yeah, that's a fascinating way to break this down, because we get lost in the weeds of here's the 20 things you must do before you go to bed.
Right.
Simply,
the other really simple way to think about it is like, think of a 3-year-old kid, a 4-year-old kid. Like, how do we get little kids? Like if you ever had kids, or if you remember being a little kid, there was a bedtime routine. You don't take a 2 to 4-year-old who's like banging trucks together and throw them in their bed and turn out the light and walk out of the room and expect them to go to sleep. There's no way that'll work. They have to get ready to go to bed. And what do? You dim down the lights. You tell them, hey, no more rough playing, no rough housing, put your toys away, work on puzzles, do some coloring, like whatever, kind of more sedate stuff. Then you go and you do what? Put them in a bathtub. What is the bathtub doing? It's dropping their body temperature down. Then what do? Take them out of that, take them out of the bathtub, you dry them off, you put them in their onesie pajamas, you put powder all over them. Well, now you're decreasing sensation. There's fewer things to be touching their skin to cause them irritation or pain or sharp or heat or anything like that. Then you put them in the bed. You bring them comfort, make them feel safe, make them feel warm. You read them a book. What kind of book is the best to read it? One they already know, things that they've rehearsed a million times in their head. They've seen all the pictures, they've heard all the words. They're just going through the routine with you to slow their brain down. They're paying less attention to their environment over and over and over again. When they feel safe and they're calm and they're sedate and their body temperature's down and the sensory's low and the lights are low, then you can get up and walk out of the room, tell them good night, and they'll fall asleep. Well, we're just big kids. We need the same thing. You don't need to wear onesies or, have people read you bedtime stories, but it's the same concept.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Fantastic. Okay. Let's touch on something else. I got these questions from some of the folks on Instagram when they learned I was interviewing you. In terms of HRV, heart rate variability, there's a lot of people talking about it now, and some say that if it's too low, then that could lead to poor quality sleep. What are your thoughts on HRV in particular as it relates to sleep, and how can we improve that or improve sleep as a function of HRV?
Yeah, so I think the way to think about it is improving HRV via sleep. Mm-hmm. So there are other players, but by and large, I think the most important thing is to understand what HRV is. And so why are we using this as a tool? It's, to some extent, it's just a tool. It's something new and shiny that people are excited about, and it'll probably diminish in popularity over time. But there's some validity to it. So, your heart has a pacemaker. Most people know that. You have a node in your heart that's going to fire. It's going to cause your heart to beat. As long as it had blood supply, you could take your heart out of your body and it would still beat, and it would do it because of this node's going to fire, this electrical pulse in the tissue of the heart. It's going to make it fire. Mm-hmm. And that has a pretty slow rate. All right. But it would be very steady. It would be perfectly on time. There would be no heart rate variability. every beat would be at exactly the same time. It would be a very, very predictable pace. Now, the other side is you can have hormones, stress hormones by and large, norepinephrine, epinephrine, essentially adrenaline, thyroid hormone. There's lots of players in this, but your hormones around your heart, they can stimulate the tissue and they can cause your heart to beat sooner. So if you had maximum stress hormones, say like fight or flight, your heart rate is probably going 120, and it's very predictable. Again, there's not a lot of beat to beat variability. Now, fight or flight is sympathetic tone. So you have this autonomic nervous system. Just think of that as your automatic nervous system. It's controlling all the stuff that you don't think about, like breathing and your heartbeat and things that are keeping you alive, all of your organs functioning, all of that's happening by the autonomic nervous system. The sympathetic is speeding it up. That's the fight or flight pathway. The parasympathetic is slowing it down. That's the rest and digest pathway. So if you have equal opportunity for the node in your heart to fire with no sympathetic tone, if that fires on its own, it takes a while from beat to beat because it's a slower rate. And sometimes your stress hormones cause your heart rate to beat. So you have equal sympathetic and parasympathetic tone. Sometimes my sympathetic nerve is making my heart beat a little sooner. Sometimes my parasympathetic nerve is causing my heart to beat a little slower. So when it's balanced, sometimes it's fast, sometimes it's slow. There's high heart rate variability. Beat to beat variation is very high. So all that's really saying is you have a balanced nervous system. And all that's really saying is that you're controlling your stress, and it's controlling your stress hormones. Now, I talked about earlier how there's a contract you're born into. 16 hours of being awake and alert and active requires 8 hours of sleep. So the whole point of going to sleep tonight is waking up tomorrow ready for tomorrow, right? I've gotten rid of the damage. I've repaired all the damage. I've restored all of the nutrients and vitamins and, fuel, all my fuel sources. I've restocked my body and it's ready for the next day, right? Like I've gone into this 8 hour pit stop and now I'm ready to race again when the alarm goes off. Well, if I don't sleep 8 hours, and instead I sleep 6 hours, tomorrow still comes. How do I do that? I just said I didn't repair 100% because I cut 25% off. So how do I do that? Well, I'm going to do it by increasing stress hormones. And then I'm going to, and those stress hormones, as I talked about earlier, that's catabolic. I'm going to use my body as a fuel source to get through the next day because I didn't recover 100% tonight. Well, if I'm going to use stress hormones, what's that going to do to my heart rate variability? It's going to decrease it. Now I have more stress hormones. I have a higher sympathetic tone than parasympathetic tone. So my heart's going to beat a little faster. Sympathetic is going to drive it more often than parasympathetic. And I'm going to have a lower heart rate variability. If I'm obviously super, super stressed, there's no variability. If I have zero stress, then there's no variability either. So the absolute opposite of deep sleep, or the absolute opposite of fight or flight is deep sleep. Deep sleep's maximum parasympathetic and fight or flight's maximum sympathetic. So I think the best use for heart rate variability, the best use for heart rate variability is just see how am I doing today? And I use sleep as my primary tool to improve my heart rate variability. And you can also, modulate your training if you're overtraining. But again, if you're overtraining, you could argue that you could just sleep more and then you wouldn't be overtraining because you'd have more time to repair. But that's kind of some nuanced planning stuff.
Mm-hmm. Okay, fantastic. I know we're coming up on time, so I want to be respectful, but I want to touch on a couple of things. One is hormones and supplementation. You touched on melatonin. From an anti-aging perspective, melatonin is a fascinating hormone, if you will. Not only is it a hormone, but it also functions as a cell protector and an antioxidant. In fact, they say that it's even a stronger antioxidant than vitamin C or E, and it helps regulate some of these antioxidant enzymes like superoxide dismutases, as well as glutathione and catalase in the body. And finally, it helps build bone as opposed to breaking down bone. And that's more important for women that are premenopausal or menopausal because they have a rapid breakdown of bone in those few years. So in terms of sleep, you touched on melatonin being the sleep hormone, quote unquote, and you talked about how the brain creates it. So what other interesting factoids can you tell us about melatonin in particular as it relates to sleep? And then I guess a follow-on question for that is I've seen lots of people just popping melatonin pills, popping them in their 30s even because they can't get enough sleep.
Yeah.
And I haven't heard good data on melatonin giving you like the perfect restorative sleep. Is that true or false?
Yeah, so as I alluded to earlier, melatonin really doesn't make you sleep. Melatonin starts the cascade of events that prepares your brain and body for sleep. Now, if you don't have the equipment, meaning you don't have the right nutrients in your brain, maybe you don't have the right neuropeptides, you don't have the right neurotransmitters because of nutritional imbalances or psychiatric disease or excess stress hormones or whatever, melatonin is not going to be as successful at getting you to sleep because it's initiating a cascade that isn't continuing, right? So if there's not enough lumber at the construction site, it doesn't matter if the crew's there doing their work or not, right? Because there's no lumber. So that's a nutritional deficiency. Now the crew could be gone as well, too, right? You could bring all the nutrition you want, bring all the lumber to the construction site and have no work crew. The lumber's just going to sit there. So, I think, but I actually got it from Matt Walker calling it the starter pistol. I hadn't used that before him, but I really like that one. And that's really what it is starting the race. And there are hundreds of, chemical changes in your brain, and different regions of your brain are changing the concentration, but changing the concentration of various chemicals in your brain. But by and large, the easy way to think about it is you don't really have sleep promoting neurotransmitters and neuropeptides, and neurotransmitters and neuropeptides are really, just think of those. Those are like hormone signalers in your brain, essentially. And they're just controlling how your brain is working, and your brain is controlling how your body's working. But you don't really have sleep promoting neurotransmitters. What you have is weight promoting neurotransmitters, and we take the weight promoting neurotransmitters away, and then the default is sleep. But you don't do it across the whole brain. You do different regions of the brain do different things. And, some regions of the brain, GABA, the gamma aminobutyric acid, it's a neuropeptide associated with sleep. Some regions of the brain, GABA actually stimulates those cells of the brain. So you don't want a bunch of GABA there. In some regions, it really slows down the sensory and helps promote sleep. So, I am hesitant to do anything super physiologically, and and it's a job security word, really. All it means is I don't do anything higher than you would have had it, sort of genetically optimally. So, it's no different than, say, a more obvious hormone like testosterone, say, right? If I give you testosterone, if I give you all the testosterone you need, then your body just quits producing testosterone. Why would it produce testosterone? It's getting it for free. If I give you way more than you need, then your body's going to quit responding to it the same, because why does it need a bunch of receptors to find this molecule when this molecule is everywhere, right? If there's a ton of testosterone around, you only need 1/10 of the receptors that you used to have. Now, if you have a normal level of testosterone, you're testosterone deficient because we got rid of 90% of the receptors. So now you actually need 10 times as much testosterone just to function normally. Well, all hormones work that way, and melatonin is no exception. Now, because of things being in the brain and not wanting to drill into people's heads and so forth for research, it's harder to establish what we're doing to melatonin receptors when we're giving people exogenous, meaning from the outside in, you're taking hormones in. When we give people exogenous melatonin, it's hard to prove that the receptors it's hard to prove that they're decreasing the amount of melatonin that they're producing, just because it's such small amounts, and it's inside the brain, and it's not crossing out into the blood-brain barrier. But what we can prove through animal models and even through autopsies is that when you give people a lot of melatonin, it decreases their number of receptors to melatonin. So when we're specifically talking about melatonin and how it relates to sleep, we're primarily talking about the brain. But melatonin, as you alluded to, is active across your entire body. It's a cell signaler. Every cell in your body has a biologic clock as to when it's doing its work and when it's resting and when it's recovering and when it's taking out the trash and when it's building things. And so that's an ultradian rhythm, and melatonin is a player in that. And like you say, it's an antioxidant. A lot of hormones are actually antioxidants and anti-inflammatory because why? Because they're anabolic, and like most of our hormones are anabolic. Probably 75% of hormones are anabolic, and only 25% of them are catabolic. So I think if you want to use melatonin to help you initiate, that's a very small dose. We're talking like 2 micrograms, 3 micrograms, something like that. Mm-hmm. That would be all you need to initiate. That's fine for sleep. I think you're in danger if you're taking melatonin as an anti-aging antioxidant, and you're going higher than your body would ever actually make it. You're going to run into problems with that. And why would you do that? This body's been evolving for thousands of years, and we've understood something about hormones for like 50 years or 100 years. We don't know what the hell we're doing. We're not smarter than evolution. So right. I wouldn't recommend going super physiologic on anything.
Okay. Let's touch on supplementation standpoint. You've made a great supplement called Sleep Remedy by Dr. Parsley, which has some really cool ingredients. Let's touch on some of them. If you would, let's talk about tryptophan and 5-HTP or 5-hydroxytryptophan and how that helps bring about sleep and the cascade.
Yeah, well, if you remember my story at the beginning of how all this came to be, like I said, a lot of the SEALs were taking Ambien. I was trying to help them get better sleep. I had to give them something when I took their Ambien away, because they were obviously taking Ambien because they couldn't sleep. So I had to come up with something. And all I did was, just, simple physiology and some pretty simple, neurochemistries. I looked at, what's changing in the brain when you're going to sleep, kind of what I was just talking about with the last question. And as you said, one of the most important things is the release of melatonin. Well, how do you make melatonin? You make it from tryptophan, right? So, if anybody's had the tryptophan coma around Thanksgiving, they know that, they eat a bunch of turkey. We blame it on the turkey. And to some extent it is the turkey, but turkey doesn't have super high levels of tryptophan. I mean, all meat has a lot of tryptophan in it. But we just generally don't overeat other meats as much as we do turkey. And then the carbs are playing in. There's some other things behind that, but everybody knows you eat your leftover turkey or your big Thanksgiving Day dinner, and then you fall asleep on the couch. It's a tryptophan coma. So, when I started looking at, what am I going to supplement these guys with? I don't just want to give them the melatonin because I want to make sure that they're making melatonin, right? Again, I don't want to give them so much that put more in their brain than their brain would ordinarily see. So I'm just helping them initiate it. So I put a super small dose of melatonin in there, but then I made sure that all the lumber was there, for the construction crew to make its own melatonin and keep that cascade of events going through the night. So if you look at the production of melatonin is L-tryptophan. L-tryptophan becomes 5-hydroxytryptophan, 5-HTP. 5-hydroxytryptophan with the help of vitamin D3 and magnesium becomes serotonin. Serotonin can then become melatonin. Now, if you're having difficulty initiating sleep, you may need to produce more melatonin. If you keep needing higher and higher amounts of melatonin to get the work done, you're going to strip out serotonin. When you strip out serotonin, we call that being depressed, right? So serotonin deficiency is associated with depression, and depression is associated with poor sleep, and poor sleep is associated with causing depression. So all I really did is, put all the constituents in there so that melatonin could be made, give a little dusting of melatonin. And then as we talked about earlier, one of the things that melatonin secretion leads to is the production of the aminopeptide or neuropeptide GABA, gamma aminobutyric acid. And so I put that in there. And so there's no physiologic trick in any of that, right? I'm making sure in the most literal sense, I'm nutritionally supplementing your brain so that you have all the nutrients there to do what you need to do. But I'm not causing any of those things to happen, and I'm not tricking anything. And then I put some GABA in there as well. And GABA doesn't cross the blood-brain barrier really well. So there's a lot of GABA in there to try to get as much in the brain as possible. But GABA does work below the neck as well, right? Like about, 20% of your real neurological tissue is below the neck, and all your peripheral nerves and all the nerves around your organs, your viscera. And then the one sort of trick that I did do in there is there's this normal peptide in our body called phosphatidylserine, and phosphatidylserine decreases stress hormones. So there's a little bit of that in case you're sleeping with too high of stress hormones that are decreasing the quality of your sleep or maybe your ability to go to sleep. But that's it. I mean, that's the whole product right there. Everything you need to produce melatonin, a little bit of melatonin, some GABA, and some phosphatidylserine to decrease the stress hormones. But you still have to do all the other stuff. It's a supplement. I always tell my clients, there's the ideal way to live your life. And with a lot of studying and labs and, a lot of time to work on it, we could pretty much figure out what would be ideal for you. And ideal would be driven by what your goals are. So there's the ideal place, ideal way to live your life. But then there's reality, right? Reality doesn't quite get you there because there's things in your way. You can't live ideally. And in between reality and ideal is where we supplement. Right. And that's what supplements are supposed to mean. So I still work, like most of my work is getting people as close to the ideal as possible. And the supplement part, that's easy. And by supplements, I don't just mean nutritional supplements. I mean like gadgets, right? Like people use gadgets to help them exercise better, gadgets to help them get to sleep better, gadgets to help them meditate better, whatever. Like that's all supplement. Like that's all supplemental.
Yeah, I believe that 100%. Like get the free things dialed down, get your lifestyle dialed down so it's appropriate. It's the best you could do. And then you can definitely supplement, but don't rely on supplements as a crutch because then you'll need a supplement for every area of your life. Okay.
It's so much more rewarding to get your life 99% on track and then just need 1% supplementation. It's so much more relaxing because then if you don't have an opportunity to use your supplementation or if you're traveling and you don't want to deal with the hassle of it, it's like, fine, like you're 99% of the way there anyway, or 98% of the way there. But when supplements are your first tool, that's only making you a little bit better and it's making you heavily reliant upon them to be any better.
Mm-hmm. And if you forget them, then you're in big trouble because now you're stressing about them.
Right.
And two, you're not going to get a good sleep without them. So so where can people find this, Doc Parsley? Can you give us the URL for the listeners?
Doc D-O-C and then Parsley like the herb, docparsley.com. My whole life's on there. So there's videos, blogs, podcasts, PDFs, my ebook. I think you can download my book, like Kindle version of my book on there. Like everything's on there.
Fantastic. I'll put a link to all of that in the show notes for this episode, which is going to be at antiaginghacks.net/good sleep. And on top of that, Doc Parsley's team has given us a 10% discount for all the listeners to go get their sleep remedy supplementation. So thank you for that, Doc. Appreciate it. Yeah. All right. I think that's all we have time for. We're running a lot overdue, but I really appreciate you coming on and sharing some gold nuggets with the audience. I would recommend everybody go get that PDF download from his website, which talks about how to manage stress and other tips for sleep. So, Doc, thanks for coming on the Anti-Aging Hack Show.
Yeah, man, my pleasure.